Hello, everyone. Again, I'm Stephanie Connors. And as we were planning this, one of the things that we had talked about is making a pitch about why social studies? Why do we teach it in the classroom? And I really had to mull that over. And as I was really thinking about what that meant, is I realized that social studies is already all around us in the classroom. It's from the collaborative class constitutions that we make at the beginning of the year to establish our what our classroom is going to be like. We're going to talk about that more in a little bit. To the background knowledge we build for students in our ELA block or in our lit block. Social studies is there. And I also think about kids in elementary are still developing social and emotional skills like learning to share and cooperate, following rules, how to collaborate effectively with others. And as kids get older, they start to explore the idea of what it means to be part of a larger group and how their friendships grow and how they get along with others. And I think that all of those skills are also part of social studies learning. And in elementary school too, kids are exploring who they are and how they fit into the world. They're using their values and belief systems to interact as their world expands around them. And it's also a time when students are building background knowledge in all content areas. And while students are building that background knowledge, they're looking for opportunities to apply it in their everyday lives. And if the learning is relevant to them, it becomes sticky. And that's where the study of social studies comes in. Students can learn how their characters develop, the sense of right and wrong, their sense of place in the world, and their own identities and how they fit into the big picture of the world outside their homes and their classrooms. Exploring how our government works and why stories of our founding fathers and all kinds of history help kids connect to the world around them and understand themselves better. They discover issues that they care deeply about and feel inspired by people from the past who are like them. They may find comfort and solace in stories like their own and not feel so lonely. They might also connect with their communities when they realize that they're part of something bigger. And one of my favorite things to share with kiddos is our fourth grade American Revolution unit in our district. And I'm always amazed at the beginning of the unit that when I ask them, why do we celebrate Independence Day or 4th of July? What does it mean? They really have no idea. They say, well, it's for fireworks, or it's so that we can have barbecues. And then I remind them that it's actually an Independence Day. It's another word for 4th of July, and why we celebrate it has a significant meaning. And when we talk more in the unit about people like George Washington and Deborah Sampson and Crispus Attucks, it always amazes me how students connect to those people, or others. Could be Thomas Jefferson. I had one student connect this past year with the Marquis de Lafayette. He just loved them. They start to connect the past events that they were learning about with current events, especially in Deborah Sampson's case. I had a student, actually multiple students, who heard about her story, but they are very strong-willed young ladies who are very independent-minded and believe that they should be able to do anything that they want to do. And when they read Deborah Sampson's story, they were surprised that she had to dress up like a man in order to fight in the war, and that she had a sense of adventure, but she didn't let anything stop her, and that there were people who supported her, and that she was able to get a pension at the end after she retired. And it was very inspiring to the girls to read about stories of people like Mercy Otis Watson, Warren, who was a playwright at the time and wrote against what was happening with the British, and that she did it at great personal peril, but she did it anyway. And it really encouraged students to look at their writing in a different way, that writing has power, and you could be a woman and say what you think and write and change the world. And I think through those experiences and those learnings through social studies and connecting, they realize that some things have changed in our world and some things haven't. but they were experiencing a kind of awakening and awareness that made them connected, made them realize too that they were connected to something bigger. And for so many Maine kids with little experience outside of their communities, I thought this was so important, and it was really fun to watch. And I noticed too that they also pushed themselves to learn more. So I had a student last year who struggled with coming to school and doesn't have the best home life, but he was studying about the Battle of Bunker Hill and realized what really happened, and how a ragtag group of not quite soldiers created a fort overnight and defended it against 3 waves of British soldiers coming up. It affected them. And then they started realizing that there were people that had great stories. And he started writing more about that story of Bunker Hill, but he started researching on his own. And one weekend, he had spent a lot of time reading about more people and had come back Monday morning and said, "Look, Mrs. Connors, look what I did." And I couldn't get him to write a paragraph before. So it was very heartening to see his growth and just how he was blooming as a student. As social studies encourages kids to ask questions and be curious. And by studying past and current events, history, biographies, and our laws and government, kids learn more about who they are and where they fit in. And they can have conversations with peers in a safe, structured setting about topics that might be hard to talk about in some cases. And they can reflect on their own learning or how they grow and changed. And so I'm hoping that today, when we have our breakout sessions, that I'll have a chance to learn from you, and we can talk more about how students develop a sense of identity through studying social studies. Thank you.
That was awesome, Stephanie. Now I have to go next. Oh my gosh. So one of the things we talked about was going off of that, especially with elementary level social studies, this is what we talk about. This is what kids are talking about. They are starting to realize that there is so much going on outside of school that is connecting to social studies. So I don't know about any of you guys, but I know that I get kids that come in all the time, and maybe their parents or their grown-ups at home were talking about things like taxes, or they heard something on the radio as an advertisement during election season. I had a lot of kids that asked questions about the pandemic. So kids, I don't know, I say this all the time, but I don't know that they always get the credit they deserve for how much they see and absorb and want to understand around them. They might go save up money to buy something that they want. So they're learning personal finance, at home. But they don't always know that that is social studies. What they're doing is social studies. They might save something up, money up, and then want to buy something. And, they know that they hand their money over to the person at the store. And then once we start doing some personal finance stuff, they realize how that money moves through their community. And so, they hear and see and absorb so much. They, most families have somebody that's super interested in, whether it's the Civil War or World War II, somebody who's interested in history. And so kids come into school with a lot of questions, and they start realizing, I notice in second grade, they're noticing, once we talk about things, how, excuse me? Okay, I'll try to go quickly. I'm sorry, they're testing our fire alarms. So they notice a lot, and they see a lot, and they absorb a lot. And so social studies, they start to realize in elementary school really is everywhere. And it really sets that ground framework for as they move up to upper elementary and middle school. I'm so sorry.
All right, I will take it from there, Steph.
Thank you.
It never fails, right? The minute you think you have everything under control. I just had to put my dog outside because he was having a moment. So the great part about working with great people is they have such great things to say. The bad part about going last is they've said everything you wanted to say. So Bear with me. Some of it may be redundant, but I really tried to think through this and like, what is my why with social studies and why am I so passionate about bringing that into my classroom and not just into my classroom, but making sure the other, grade levels in my school are starting to really think strategically about what they want to teach and why they want to teach it. And so I think my why kind of brought me to the foundations piece and really how social studies instruction is the foundation of so much of the learning that happens within the elementary school. And I think the first step in thinking about that is that social studies is more than history. It's more than maps. It's more than map scales. It's more than some of those things that I think we put social studies in the box with. And so my focus on that was really, what does that mean as a foundation? And so as we think about social studies instruction and the relevance in the elementary school classroom, I think it's important to reflect on the things that we first teach our own children. And so I think Stephanie, the first Stephanie, was saying a lot about that piece. And like, when you have a baby and then they get into those toddler age and then, they're expanding into preschool, we spend so much of our time teaching kids norms. And that really is a social studies concept, right? We have this society, we have things that are culturally acceptable, we have things that are not. And we spend a lot of time focusing on that and helping our own children navigate through that. And then we bring kids into the classroom and, we spend those first 3 weeks really developing a culture and developing systems and developing a community. And those really are all social studies concepts that we put a lot of emphasis on. And I think sometimes in the elementary school classroom, that piece gets not overlooked in the sense that they don't do it, but overlooked in the sense that that really is part of social studies instruction. And so I think that is part of it. That's part of those foundations. These are all concepts that are rooted in that social studies world, and it's part of their foundational learning that we've all experienced. So it's kind of a leveler. When you think about equity and instruction, this is a great place to start. And so building that strong foundation is important for all students when they're pre-K all the way up through, your senior year. Like Stephanie was saying, this is what kids talk about. So these are the conversations that are essential to developing thinkers. I have always encouraged my child, as sometimes it leads to those moments where you're like, this is going to serve you really well as an adult, but as a kid, you're driving me nuts because you have such strong opinions about everything. But I think, when we think about our own kids and we think about our students, we want kids to develop a voice. We want them to have an opinion. We want them to be well-versed in facts and in be able to navigate through this world of information that they're bombarded with on a daily basis. I mean, I look at what my daughter does as a 17-year-old and the information that she has access to that was not even possible for me at 17. And these kids have the whole entire world at their fingertips. And it's like, how do you teach them to navigate through that? And so much of that is based in the world of social studies and fact finding and being able to figure out what information is accurate and what information is, we went through the whole fake news piece. And it's like, it really is a legitimate thing. How do we teach kids to navigate in this world where anybody can post anything and make it seem factual? So I'm going to spend a little bit more time later on talking about the disciplinary literacy pieces and how important that is to embed in the social studies world. And I do think that is an important piece when we're talking about building foundations. And I guess finally, I think it's our responsibility to prepare students for that future learning. We have the benefit of, random fly in the house. We have the opportunity as elementary school teachers to really start building these strong foundations. And one of my arguments that I always make to my 5th grade cohort is we're sending students off to the middle school where they're going to sit in a social studies classroom for 60 minutes, 90 minutes. And we haven't prepared them for that type of learning at all if we're only ever just teaching ELA and math. And so it's really about building strong foundations, opening doors, sparking that interest for kids, and getting them passionate about learning, because all of a sudden, when they're reading about something they're super excited about, whether it's a culture from another place, whether it's about a historical event or a historical figure, it's super exciting to see them transfer that into like meaningful reading strategies. And all of a sudden they're hungry and they want to go to the library and find a book on that topic, or they come back and they're like, I looked this up at home. And so I think it really opens a lot of doors for students. And sometimes it's the students that school really just always isn't something they love. So my argument for the social studies in the elementary school classroom is that it really is about building strong foundations in their personal lives, in their educational life, and then just as a society, right? Like to have people that are well educated, well versed about the world around them so that they can go off and make informed decisions on their own.
Thank you, Stephanie, Melissa, Stephanie. That's why I bring in those elementary voices so that they can, speak to that. Because I said we need to start off with the why for social studies, because I think a lot of people think, yeah, we should do social studies. Social studies is important. But not everybody is necessarily able to find some of that time or find some of the rationale and reasoning behind that time. And so I like to start off by giving some of those pieces. And so I had those three voices, and I'm going to give you the very quick version of my research argument, the data point, because in elementary school, I keep hearing about reading scores and test scores and all these type of things. And that's why we need more literacy, and literacy is replacing social studies time. And I keep trying to scream from the mountains over and over again. If you want to increase your reading scores, it's actually more social studies. And it's very contradictory to what we think. A lot of things in life, the more we practice it, the better we get, but it doesn't work that way in reading. And the people here in the room, I don't know our range in experience in the classroom, but you've probably been a part of some sort of reading program, some sort of reading initiative. We've bought this piece, we've done this, we brought in this training, here's this, here's that. And what the data tells us with the NAEP national exam is that we've been doing this for almost 20 years, and reading scores in our country have not changed in 20 years. No matter how much we double reading time, no matter how much money we put into that, we continue to see the same gaps in the reading. And a lot of that is because of how people actually learn how to read. And so recently there was a NAEP panel reviewing test scores, and one of the panelists was Daniel Willingham. He's a brain psychologist at the University of Virginia who studies reading. And he keeps saying the biggest thing we miss when it comes to reading comprehension is background knowledge. Do we know all the pieces that fit into everything? Because authors cannot include everything in the writing. So they assume that you know these things. And Nell Duke from the University, she's at Michigan State, she says, yes, we've put such an emphasis on like phonemic awareness and all those pieces that kids get to 4th grade, because we hear though, if kids can't read by 3rd grade, which is true and accurate dated information. But she says, kids are getting to 4th grade with the ability to read the words, but they don't have the knowledge to actually comprehend it. They're not able to fill in those missing blanks that Willingham says authors have to leave out. And so then that leads to some problems in the comprehension part. Kids can read and then can't actually understand what they are reading. And study after study has shown the benefits of all this stuff. And so I'm kind of telling you this, if you're not really on board, great, we'll work on that. If you are, and you've been trying to get your administration to get on board, I can help you with that. I can give you the copy of notes, I can talk, I can do meetings with your groups, because whether we're talking about comprehension, social studies helps. Processing vocabulary, social studies helps. Learning new vocabulary, social studies helps. If you're helping students to understand how to make an inference, you guessed it, social studies helps. Study after study, again, shows all these different components. And one of the most famous studies is known as the baseball study. And they've repeated it 81, 88, 95, these large studies with 4th and 5th grade students. And basically what we keep finding over and over again, that the #1 indicator of a student's ability to read is background knowledge. And Robert Marzano's earliest work talks about the words and terms and concepts students need to be familiar with to be academically successful. And 57% of those words are social studies words. And our reaction is we're cutting social studies where they would learn the words that they need to develop the background knowledge in order to be academically successful. We're actually doing the opposite of what we need to do. The more that students are able to read and comprehend that background knowledge, another of the greatest indicators of student success in kindergarten was their background knowledge in science and social studies. Students in kindergarten who had greater background knowledge in science and social studies, it was another indicator of academic success. And so last, the most recent research out from the Fordham Institute, we've heard study after study, again, where it says, well, more social studies time increases literacy. We've seen that over and over again. Fordham tried something new recently. They said, what if we, instead of just increasing social studies time, what if we cut ELA time? What if we replace ELA time with social studies time? And they found this actually increased literacy skills. That we've seen so much time in literacy, and then we're trying to backfill in with social studies where possible, that the Fordham Institute's big study said that you can actually do the complete opposite. You can cut literacy and ELA time, but if you replace it with social studies, and that was the only content area that they found that they worked with. And so they saw that more time is spent on literacy than any other content area in elementary school. There's no indicator of research that says more literacy time leads to increased reading scores. So they're already questioning, why are we spending so much time? And then they found that those who actually had more social studies time in place of literacy had the highest reading scores. And this was essential and actually helped even more young ladies, girls, low income and non-English speaking homes benefited even more. Everybody benefited in general, but if you're looking for higher reading scores for your low income students, your girls and non-English speaking homes, this was another piece. So there's the 5-minute version of what I usually do a half day, a full day workshop on, because we have to be convinced that this problem where everybody talks about we need higher reading scores can be solved, and it is with social studies. I always say, I don't want to say social studies can save all of the world's problems or solve all the world's problems, but I think that's the end of that sentence, because I don't know how to finish it otherwise, because I'm pretty sure that social studies can. But of course, Joe, you're the social studies specialist. You would say that, you would be all on board with this. So we're going to take a moment actually to let all of you vent a little bit and share some thoughts. We're going to break you into your job-alike groups. So Stephanie Nichols is going to take the early elementary. Melissa and Stephanie Connors are going to take the upper elementary. I'm going to send you to a breakout room. And we basically want you to finish this sentence. Yeah, but social studies is great, Joe. I want to do more of it. But what are the barriers in that way? So we want to hear more about that, because I want to help inform the work that I'm doing and the work that we're all doing. And if everybody's stumbling in the same barrier, I want to know that. So I'm going to send you out into the breakout rooms. I'll bring you back in about 15 minutes or so. I'll bounce in the rooms and check on everybody, but you will be facilitated by Stephanie Connors if you are K2, and Stephanie Nichols for K2, and Melissa and Stephanie Connors if you are 3 through 6. So I'm going to open up those breakout rooms and we'll see you back in about 15 minutes. All right, welcome back, everybody. I hope you had good breakout session times. I'm going to give you about a quick 10, maybe 15 minute, hopefully closer to 10-minute overview of the Let's Act framework. I think that this is a good piece. It says here, framework for teaching controversial current events. I think it's just a good framework for social studies at the elementary level, either way. So if you're like, oh, like that, I'm looking for support in contentious issues like that, look at it through that lens. If you're looking for a structured, scaffolded way to teach social studies, look through it at that end. Look at it through that lens. So this is from Genevieve McCaffrey. She is a professor at the University of Missouri. She's a former elementary teacher who's put this framework together. And I'm going to give you the quick little overview. Let's Act, talking about listen, educate, talk, search, analyze, conclude, and take action. So then what does this mean? So here's your quick little kind of overview. We'll go through these one at a time, again, just as a very brief piece. But what we're wanting to do is we're wanting to listen, and you're going to find out she's added love. The L is listen and love to the students to kind of build a background piece of where they're at, educate them to give them the necessary vocabulary, background knowledge to, about this topic to work with. Have them talk about it in small group ways, that the focus is not around taking a stance, but rather just starting to get information out there. Look to have them search for more information. You can work on media literacy, analyze what they've learned, what are some different lenses in which they can look at it. The conclude here is some sort of discussion, full group discussion, debate piece where we've brought all the information to the table to work with. And then take action is kind of that reporting out piece. How are they going to share all of what they've learned? And so you heard, again, just that very quick piece in here. So love and listen, starting with your students. And I like this as both the big picture of your entire year with your classroom, right? Starting with that love, learn about each student, building classroom community. Genevieve McCaffrey talks about when she was a classroom teacher, she would go to each one of her students' houses. So this is pre-pandemic, before you had to Zoom into everybody's houses. But she said it was so important to know, like, these students, these children who are coming into her classroom, what is their life like at home? Where are they coming from? And so she did that in the summer before school would even start. So she knew who she was kind of working with, really working on building classroom community. I emphasize a lot, like, classroom contracts and classroom rules are not new. But the idea of building them with students, having student feedback, input, and then doing something with those. Do you go over them every day? Do you have them, you know, if you're a one-to-one school, is it taped on their device? You just need that reminder, again, that very consistent piece of what is our community, our classroom community all about. She talks about building a listening culture, where people are hearing what each other are saying and not trying to just talk over one another, and making sure we're doing this. A tip that I give to teachers is this, it's a best practice in WIDA supports for ELLs, is if you're having students take turns talking, the next student has to summarize what the previous student said. And then, so if Stephanie Nichols went first, and then Melissa is going next, Melissa would say, well, what I heard Stephanie say is this. And then Stephanie could say yes or no if that's correct, right? Because it helps cut down on any misconceptions, but making sure we're very on the same page. And it also makes sure that students are listening, not just waiting for their turn to talk. And that helps bring in this multiple perspectives piece, right? What does everybody have to bring to the table and to contribute to this conversation? And that's about knowing what they already know. And one of the times I chatted with her, we were talking about this step, and she said, I always struggle with this because I'm always afraid elementary teachers are just going to do a KWL. Then they'll say, check, now I know what they know. And she's like, but it's so much more than that. It really is about embracing topics that you might not embrace originally, because the students actually do have enough knowledge to do it, but you don't know that until you actually get into there. So it's beyond just what do you know about this little concrete piece, but who are your students? What do they know? And then where can you find those places to build? So then let's educate. Right, we talked about earlier Marzano and those importance of those key terms and the background knowledge and important to literacy. Help students with that vocabulary. What do they need to know for that? So you need to educate them. Once you know where they're at, give them that the vocabulary, give them the background knowledge, both appropriate kind of grade level, appropriate to the content, but also varied. Multiple perspectives, whatever topic you're going to talk about, make sure there's a variety of different books or book types, topics, people's angles, whether we're talking about, diversity in terms of voice, who's speaking, what are we reading, is it listening, is it video? All of these things come in at this time, giving all the students as many different avenues to take learning as possible. Then give them a chance to talk. Genevieve stresses that this is not about taking a stand yet or something, or saying, hey, this is what I know, or this is what I believe, or this is the right answer. But rather it's about working together to pool kind of their knowledge. And so one idea is if you were talking about what is better, puppies or kittens? What makes the better pet, puppies or kittens? You can have them look at or read, or as a class, you can read and look at different bits of information. And then say like, okay, so which of these is very much saying, yes, puppies are for sure the best? And which of these are saying, yes, for sure, kittens are the best? And which of these are kind of saying, well, puppies by a little, right? So you can start to organize the information. They're having to process what they're reading and learning about, but it's not necessarily their take on it yet. You think about that spectrum of where the people are thinking. You can think about perspectives of everything we talked about. Which of these were from parents, or which were these from dog owners, or which were these from cat owners, right? Because if all the dog owners are saying dogs are the best, that means something, right? But it also means we might not have to be able to just listen to them. And so find those different ways that they can take bits of information to work with it, and then discuss, reflect. Okay, so what did you hear from people? What were you thinking? You're starting to then move them. It was how other people felt, and then now they're starting to reflect on that a little bit. Taking what they've learned then, okay, so now that we had some thinking about what we wanted to still know, go out and search. So we still had questions, and I'm sorry, I didn't quite say that in here. This discuss and reflect would include those questions that they might still have. And then we want to help them find those answers. If it's in the younger grades, it's going to be with support, teacher support, librarian support. As we get more into third, fourth, fifth, sixth grade, it might be a little less of that direct hands-on as they do a little bit more, but it gives them an opportunity to go explore what they want to explore, what they have questions about, voice and choice. Let them explore the learning. It's an opportunity for you to teach media literacy. How do they go find these things? What's reputable? What's not? Who, what, where, why, that type of stuff. And then they're going to start pulling things that they've learned so that they can work on their conclude activity, which will come up in just a second. So now they've got all this information. They've got information about what they learned in the small group stuff, the talk section of Let's Act. They've got the information that they pulled from their search component. You can take that and you can go back and reread books, your picture books as a class, and examine, okay, aha. Do we have new questions now? Have we read this? Are we rereading this to take a different perspective? Are we reading it for the first time? They're starting to think differently about things that they're reading. This might be primary sources if we're thinking some of those older grades. Are you giving them little things to read about? Oh, well, what do we know about this person? What do we think? Where does it fit? You can work on developing timelines if we're talking about history. This can even be a point where they're doing a presentation. They don't have to wait all the way to the end. They can present on the things that they found, and we're thinking this. They're processing the information so that by the time we get to C in Let's Act, you hit this conclusion part. And you can have them engage in discussions like Socratic seminars, fishbowl, philosophical chairs, where it's a little bit more of an open piece where they're coming around. So like what is the best season? All right, let's discuss this. Or you can do more of a debate where it's more structured. You can do kind of your traditional debate where it's puppies or kittens, let's talk. Or you can do more structured, like structured academic controversies. You can do gallery walks. If you've done gallery walks before, I tell people you can debate in written formats. You can have pieces up and have students walk back and forth because it gives them time to think and to process, right? It's not always who can say it out loud first, but sometimes it's that discussion piece. Or it can just be as simple as voting. All right, class, we've done all this stuff. We're going to reach our conclusion now. How many people here love kittens? How many love puppies? All right, puppies have it 12-8, whatever the numbers might be. And then in the end, it's kind of that last piece. So then what do you want them to do? They've learned something now. Are they going to write a letter to the editor or some sort of writing assessment, reflection, essay piece? You can have them create a public service announcement, whether it's a short little video clip. Maybe they're making a speech on the morning announcements, talking about whatever was discussed in class. Making an informational brochure, a trifold, a written kind of design piece. You can have them pull together an exhibit. You can invite families in to your classroom as part of an open house where we have our 4 sides of the room. And these people, they thought summer was the best season. This was spring, this was winter, this was fall. We've collected our artifacts. We've got, now come on in and hear what the students have put together. You can find public spaces that are willing to host this. Go to your local library. Will they host an area of what your students have created? Or is it a community service project where they're getting engaged? Maybe they're working with your local town, city, county, a local park system. Again, depending on what did you have them learning about throughout that unit. And so when you do the Let's Act whole framework, you're taking students to think about our social studies lens. Who are they? What are they bringing to the table? Where are our diverse perspectives? Educating them on that critical vocabulary and background knowledge that they'll need so they can participate in a talk where they're working with each other in small groups to process some of that information before going out to learn more on their own, the search part of it, where they bring it in, they work with that information to kind of reach a conclusion, to then tell you what they learned. And again, depending on the grade level, if you're down Stephanie Nichols' grade, that's 2nd grade, some of this is going to be a lot more structured with kids. This isn't always necessarily free for all, and it doesn't always have to be that contentious topic, right? What are you learning about? But since getting to know Genevieve and finding this and reading this and talking with her and reading more, I really like this as a nice, clean little framework for social studies at elementary school. It just kind of walks you through, here's your little unit, because we need social studies to be more than, well, I read this book, or we read this little piece, or we've got a worksheet, or we watched a video. So here's this coherent piece where I think if you take students through this, they are doing social studies. Because I always say social studies is a doing, it's a verb, not a noun. And I see something in the chat. Let me stop share really quick. I will grab the chat. Yes, Kate, I will send out, we have a Google folder of resources that we're compiling of all the presentations you're going to see today, and we will get you the link to that folder. Otherwise, I will also drop in the link, the link address, because this is not me, this is Genevieve McCaffrey. So she's got her website, GenevieveMcCaffrey.com. So with that, we're going to take a quick little pause. All right, welcome back from break, everybody. We're going to go into our next part here where we're going to talk about best practices in the elementary classroom. We've got our 3 co-leaders for today. They've all taken some things that they are very passionate about, and they're going to talk about how they implement it in their classroom, what they think about, what it looks like, and they're here to answer any questions for you. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Stephanie Connors.
Make sure that I'm not muted.
So I really liked having our session this morning. So we could think about what were some yeah buts for folks, and that kind of helped me think a little bit more about what I can add to this presentation today to kind of help everyone kind of get what they need. And I was going to talk today about project-based learning, gamification, and Moose platform. So let's go ahead and get started. Yep, project-based learning. So we're going to start with that. And according to the Buck Institute, which is a really, really great resource for project-based learning, and there are resources and links to all of these in the slideshow, which is going to be shared with you, and also a shared resource, some shared resources. So you'll actually be able to go to any of these later on when you have a little bit more time. But project-based learning is, or PBL, is a teaching method that involves asking students to engage in real world or personally meaningful projects. And let's go ahead and dive right in and explore more about project-based learning. And when I was thinking about it, with the American Revolution still kicking around back in my brain, I found this quote by Benjamin Franklin: "Tell me and I forget, teach me and I may remember, involve me and I learn." And when students are actively engaged in their learning, they tend to remember it and get more from it. Student agency improves when students have a choice about showing what they learn. And I know Stephanie Nichols is planning to talk a little bit more about voice and choice in the next after me. So we'll explore that a little bit more too. Oops. So we all know what projects are, right? We think about desserts and versus main courses is how the Buck Institute talks about project-based learning. So they say that this project on the left came from a website that was, these are all some ideas that you could incorporate into your social studies instruction. I think it's supposed to be like a bracelet that somebody had worn, somebody famous had worn. And then this one was a main course, and it was a video. It was a new Nike commercial that came, that was shown during the Olympics. And I want to show it so badly, but I feel like I don't want to take up a lot of time with it. But it's about a young woman in high school, and she says, "You all know about dynasties, right?" And it talks about how the American women's basketball team won gold medals for the last 7 Olympics. So they can't be beat, the American women's basketball team. And so instead of talking about Greek or Roman dynasties or Alexander the Great, she wants to talk about the women's American basketball team and how they are on top when it comes to the Olympics. And the passion that she brings to that, I know it's just a commercial, but I felt like I could really connect to that, because when I've seen kids in project-based learning, they feel so connected to what they've done and what they're passionate about, that this was a really great example of that. And it's kind of inspiring. So when you have access to this slide deck, this is actually a link that you can play and see the commercial. There are 7 design elements that the Buck Institute talks about when designing project-based learning. The gold standard has 7 elements, but always focusing on the learning goals. So, I know that the social studies learning results have been updated in 2019. And so we use those when we were creating our Moose platform modules, and we were thinking about those. So always start with your learning goals. What are the understandings that you want students to have, and what success skills should they have at the end of the project? So you're always thinking backwards, like what are your end results? The project should always start with a challenging problem or question. And each project will involve sustained inquiry, which is why, kind of making a bracelet or just creating a log cabin to show kind of where the pilgrims might have, what kind of home the pilgrims might have made, is not really the best gold standard for project-based learning. Projects should be authentic. They should allow for student voice and choice. They should encourage student reflection, have opportunity for critique and revision. And we're going to talk about a project a little bit later that my class had done And it ended up being a writing project. And it contains a public product. Everyone should contain a public project. And one of the great things about the Buck Institute is that they said that not all of these are required, but try to include as many as you can. Like we were able to include the critique and revision in the project that I'll talk about a little bit later, because we had our workshop model for writing. And so there was a lot of times where I could meet with students and help them refine what they were trying to say. And they met with their friends for peer editing. And if you're new to PBL, start small and allow time to reflect on your own practice. It doesn't have to be perfect at first. Just start with what's manageable for you. We've kind of been saying all morning that it's really hard to find time. So don't feel like your first project has to be a giant, enormous thing. More things to consider are that PBL increases student engagement, and they can include multiple content areas. The best ones do. They might bring in, and I tend to love reading and literacy. So oftentimes if students are working on some sort of project that we'll talk about, well, you know, if you're having trouble getting information, what are some research strategies that you need to learn? Another thing that's great about project-based learning is the 21st century learning and career readiness skills that they develop: critical thinking, solving real-world problems, communicating, collaborating with each other, and speaking and presenting skills. Projects are fun to teach. Kids love them. And again, we were talking about equity earlier. Project-based learning is great for all kids, no matter the skill level or the language spoken. So no matter where a child is, they can take a project starting where they are and grow as much as they can. And how might you use, this is my challenge question, is to think, how might you use project-based learning in your classroom? So at the end of the day, about 11:15, we're gonna have breakout rooms where we can like flesh out some ideas, look at some resources, think about how these might work in your classroom. So as we're going through these today, think for yourself, like, is there a big subject or a big content area or some big idea that your district focuses on or is really proud of, or something you really like that you think kids might like, that you could work on creating something today, or starting to create your skeleton and work on your filling out that skeleton later today? So I just wanted you to put that bug in everybody's ear. Here are some resources to get folks started. These are all links. PBL Works, some ideas for social studies, Teach Thought, project-based learning ideas for teachers, and Edutopia. I use Edutopia a lot for just some kind of where do I get started, and so that was great for people who might be new. The second thing I wanted to talk about today is gamification. And this kind of came up when I was listening to Joe talk about his Let's Act framework, or the yes and test scores earlier, is where do we fit, where could we possibly fit social studies instruction in, and how can we incorporate that into what we do every day? And one really great way to do it is to use gamification. And gamification theory in education is based on the idea that kids learn best when they're having fun. And so it seems like that's such a big buzzword, right? We hear all these educational buzzwords all the time, but it really is just about, you know, how can kids play and use games in the classroom? Oh, there we go. Here we go. So I just wanted to show some games that we remember as kids growing up that you're probably still using in your classrooms, like bingo and Scrabble, maybe Boggle, and then Oregon Trail. I found this little picture of Oregon Trail. Was like the first kind of educational video game. And then I wanted to just kind of ask, I heard somebody say in our breakout room earlier that they use Quizlet. And to think, is anybody using Kahoot, Quizlet, or this is one of my favorites, Ben's Guide to the US Government, which has lots of really fun things. And to just be thinking about kind of what's the difference in these things. I know old school, we could play board games are great. And then now we've got some virtual games. And so how can we incorporate the best of old and new? Because kids, they don't get tired of bingo. They still love it even today. And education, gamification doesn't have to be another educational buzzword. When students are actively engaged in their learning, they tend to remember it and get more from it. And who doesn't like having fun? So the benefits of gaming are that they appeal to students. The students are motivated to improve their performance to advance, especially if they're playing something where they have to level up. So if they're really motivated to level up, they're going to figure out what they need to do to get better, or to beat the game, or to be the winner of the game that time. And so that's grit. That's what we want them to have, that develop that sense of perseverance. They develop problem solving. If you can't get past a certain level in a game, why is that? You've got to figure out what you need to do. If there are games that kids are playing together, they develop collaboration and cooperation skills. And interactive virtual games are great for in-person, hybrid, or remote learning environments. There are lots of pre-made games. Some can be used for assessments, which are great for us to get a sense of where kids are. And again, they're good for all kids, no matter the skill level or language spoken. And you're already doing it, but how might you up your game in your classroom? So I know this is new and I might be going through it way too fast. But I wanted folks to be thinking about, okay, we've got this term of gamification. What does that mean? What is that like? How can I use this in my classroom? Because for folks that are saying they don't have a lot of time to do things, maybe gamification might be just that way, combined with picture books to help develop a sense of vocabulary, to maybe start putting events together, comparing and contrasting current events and past events. So just kind of be thinking, because we could work on this also later this afternoon. And the Moose platform, this is, I don't know if a lot of folks have had a chance to kind of go through this, but this past school year, with the situation being what it was, with some schools in person, some schools in a hybrid situation, and some schools completely online, the Maine Department of Education put together a library of online learning, and its full name is called Maine Online Opportunity for Sustained Education. And it was created by Maine educators with flexible lessons and modules from K-12. It's great for in-person learning, homeschoolers, or remote learners. And one of the things that the creators of the content really thought about is, what are teachers and students at different times of the year in different grade levels, what are the things that they should be working on? And so we took our learning targets as we created these and thought about, like, what kinds of activities, what kinds of projects, what kinds of lessons could students or do teachers need to help them in their classroom. And so we did a lot of the work for teachers, and I would encourage folks to take a look at this. I have this is a website. You would just go to, just type in your browser, Learn with Moose at maine.gov, and you can find it, or .maine.gov to find it. This is kind of what it looks like. And I thought maybe I could go in and just kind of take you on a little tour. The great thing about these Moose modules is that you can take a little piece of it if you want, or you can use as much of it or as little as you want. The sign-in is optional. It says to log in here. You can, but you don't have to. So your landing page is this one, and you can explore modules by grades. So they're pre-K to second grade.
3rd to 5th grade, middle school, and high school. And so today I thought that maybe we could take a look at some of the pre-K to 2nd and 3rd to 5th. But there are ways you can search for things. So if you're looking for specific topics, like if you want to think about fractions for 4th grade, you can type in and do a search. So let's just say we're going to go to 3rd and 5th because they would do fractions. And find a module is what you would click on. And you could say, there's a list of pop-ups here where teachers could pick from. So if we were thinking about, maybe I was interested in making art, but I'm interested in maybe creativity and want 3rd to 5th grade. So apply, let's see what comes up. And so you could look around and see what there is here. I feel like, Joe, there was a better way to do the searching where if you typed in math, but I think maybe for next time they might do that. But you can also search with these tiles. This one was one that I created and worked with Joe a lot last year. And we created this character named Maple the Moose, and this was a civics module. And throughout, we did 4 chapters. And so each module was like a chapter in our book. And each one talked about some aspect of civics and government. And so in this one, Maple is exploring how she can become involved in her community. And before that, she learned about government and civics, and she learned about how the government works. And now she's thinking about how she can take a passion of hers and make a change for the good using her community. So this tells you the topics, the activities, any tools needed, and the standards that we addressed here. This is where you would find the module itself. So you can have kids kind of go through the module. If you have one-to-one devices, it might be if you picked a topic that you thought was interesting for kids, like I used part of a Maple module, we did measurement and we did shapes and area, but we didn't have enough time to teach it before the spring NUIA. So my classroom used a part of a Maple chapter that we had developed using those, at least so kids would have some familiarity with those terms and concepts before they took a test. So we just took a little piece of it. And because they're Google Slides, you could make a copy of it and then you could just take what you want. A lot of these modules are like that, where you can just take a little piece of what you want. And I wanted to kind of go back. Oops, take a tour. Oh, let's go back. Again, here we go. So if you wanted to, you could just kind of check these out, look at the tiles, Earth systems, if you're looking for career readiness. This was a good one, get me outside, habitats and change. So there should be, I want it and I want it later. So this one looks like it could be money. This one is a money one, invest in my best and manage my money. So let's go to back to the beginning and we could check out some K2 modules as well. Here we go. So there's things about nature, environment, culture, community, and we tried to incorporate as many learning standards as we could. So we tried to do not just thinking about math and reading and writing, science and social studies, but we also tried to incorporate social and emotional learning, career readiness, and like physical activities and art. So some of these have opportunities for kids to practice art projects. And this one's about big emotions, celebrations for citizenship. So there's some really, really good stuff here. And I think my time is over. Oh, wait, there's a couple things in the chat. Oh yeah, sorry. I'm all done. Oh, I'll stop share.
Awesome. All right. So that was really great. So yeah, so I think, kind of going off of what Stephanie had talked about using project-based learning, I was going to talk a little bit about using inquiry-based learning, and I'll just quickly share my screen. So in my classroom, this is just some examples of how I use inquiry and student choice in teaching social studies in my second grade classroom. Kind of starting out first, what is inquiry and what is student choice? So inquiry is a method of teaching content using guiding questions that are kind of answered at the end of a unit. And then students have an opportunity to find through research and more exploration of an area of interest to them. They have an opportunity to answer those guiding unit questions. So this practice gives students the opportunity to share their voices and be involved in their learning, as well as explore topics in social studies through some of their personal interests that might surround our unit that we're doing. So I apologize, my room forgot that I was here. Okay. So it's an opportunity where, we're kind of giving sort of a guiding question or guiding theme for our unit, and then students have an opportunity to kind of break off and answer those guiding questions or through research or an area of interest that would answer those questions of their choosing. So what could this look like in a classroom? In my own classroom, I've used inquiry and social studies. The example that I used to share with you guys today is a women's history unit that I've done in the past. I'd had a unit question. So the question of the unit was, how have women contributed to history? And along with some guiding questions to help get my students to a place where they could answer that question. So some of those guiding questions were, are expectations the same for women and girls as they were 100 years ago? And what or how have those expectations changed in 100 years? Sounds like a huge topic to tackle with second graders, but it was actually really cool. And they were super interested because at that age, I feel like it's really concerning to them that, things might not always be equal or things aren't always necessarily considered fair. So together to start out, we'd created a KWL chart and we worked in small groups to start kind of answering those questions. We learned about discrimination and what bias is and what things were different for women and men 100 years ago, how things were different for adults and kids 100 years ago. Oops, oh goodness. So then what happened after we did those guiding questions, we had kind of that background knowledge. Then students were responsible for choosing their own figure in women's history for a final research project. In second grade, we learned how to do Google slideshows. And so we do use that tool for a couple different projects we have throughout the school year. One of the resources that I really enjoy using is Epic. It's free. It's basically an online library. And so what I try to do is, or what we do as a second grade team is curate and put together a collection of books for students to access. So we put together an epic women's history biography collection with, I think we had like 45 books or something in the collection. It was a very diverse collection. I do like to use those epic collections because they can be really differentiated in terms of reading levels. So kids have access to stories where they call them a read to me. So kids can follow along as a book is being read to them. There's access to other reading levels. So there are books that aren't read to me that kids can read maybe at a lower level, moving up. So we do have a lot of fun with that, and making sure that all of our students have access at their level. So we set up an epic biography collection, and then we had students answer research questions, and I have that template on the next slide. But we had, no matter who kids chose, they answered kind of the same questions. So they had said things like, how did my figure change an unfair rule, policy, or law? How did my figure stand up to discrimination? And then how did they impact women's history? So this allowed students to explore parts of women's history that were interesting to them to answer the unit question. So we had, different female athletes, we had astronauts, we had all kinds of, women, female scientists, all kinds of different figures for them to explore based on something that was interesting to them. So did I include that? Yeah, I did. So one of the really awesome things that I really love about using inquiry and student choice is that, one, it can be used in other content areas in elementary classrooms. And I know in my but session, we had talked about cross-curricular units, and I find that this is a really good tool for that. It's really great for helping answer questions in science, ELA, and math, as well as social studies. Especially science, I think, where kids really have an opportunity to do some exploration in areas that are of interest to them. Again, inquiry can be a really helpful tool in connecting other content areas to social studies. One of the ways my students really love having choice, and whenever that's involved, I find that that's when kids say, we kind of wrap up the end of a year and, oh, what were your favorite things that we did this year? And I find that when students have that choice and really that voice in their learning, I find that those are the units that kids really seem to remember, and it really sticks with them. And I think a lot of that is, in second grade at least, is a little bit of controlled choice, but I think that it engages them more because they're deciding and they're having a say in their learning, and they're expressing their interests at the same time. So I included an example. We in second grade have used a rubric like this in some of our other projects. This is sort of a student guided rubric. So what I do is, when we did this project, when students picked an area of interest, a figure of interest that they wanted to research, they basically had these questions on a sheet to answer to get their information for their slideshow. But they also had their own rubric so that they could keep track of their learning and kind of own it as they went. So I give this to students and I say, if you find, there's no order necessarily with how you have to find the answers. So if I find I can explain the rule or policy they faced before how they changed that rule, then that's fine. What they do is, when they find that they can answer that question, or they can do that, like I can explain the unfair rule, law, or policy they faced, students color in their puzzle piece. And so that helps them keep track visually of their learning, because then they can see, oh, I've already done this, that one's colored in. Okay, I've done this, it's colored in. And they can track their own and monitor their own progress. So I find that that really helps with that student choice too. It just helps them stay a little more organized. And I really love when I can give students the opportunity to really be in charge of their learning. And me just kind of be that facilitator for them. So I really love to use these student guided rubrics. I've used other ones before in math. I've done it like a clock when we did time. and students color in or add stickers to some of my other rubrics as they go through. So they have choice, and they also have choice when they're doing their rubric, because they might find one area of it, one aspect about their person before another. And so that helps them kind of keep track. I also included, sorry, I know I talk super fast, I get really excited. I did include a couple articles that I found, just because, you know, maybe inquiry-based learning is new for you, or maybe you'd like to learn a little bit more about it. And so I included some things. There's a really great introduction from Edutopia. I know it's really great. Stephanie had mentioned them before too. I also use them as a great resource when I'm just starting to kind of look into something or get a rough idea of what something is before I dive a little deeper. So there is an article on what is inquiry-based learning. And then there is a reading from the University of Notre Dame. Notre Dame. And it's just looking at the difference between project-based and inquiry-based learning. They are very similar, but they are different. And so sometimes, at least for me, I want to make sure if I'm following a track that I'm really excited about, that I am actually calling it or addressing it as what it is. So there's a little bit of a difference. So I think that would go really nicely with the things that Stephanie said about project-based learning, and then looking a little deeper at inquiry-based learning as well. So that's it. Thank you guys so much.
All right, thank you, Stephanie. So I'm gonna take over for the screen share. Today I'm gonna be talking to you about the DBQ, which is document-based questioning. This one is a little bit different from the two Stephanies, because this one actually involves a little bit of a budgetary request. So I will start off by saying that, just because I think sometimes people get really excited and then they're like, yeah, I'm going to do this. And then you're like, oh, but I have to actually order it, or I have to put a budget request in for it. So I will tell you up front, it's the best $350 that my school and my district has spent. You can purchase a physical binder, which is yours to keep forever. So it's a one-time deal of $350, or you can actually use the online version, which I'll show you today. Same price, but that is renewable. So that's just kind of a little aside for you to just be aware of as you're going through this. We talked a lot about the struggle of time with social studies, and how do I fit it all in, and how do I include literacy? And I really found in our district that this was the answer to that. So a DBQ is a document-based question. In a nutshell, it's a primary and secondary sources that are used to answer a thesis question. Students use evidence from the text to support their opinions. So if you are a really 3 through 6 teacher, this is something that we're working on continually throughout the course of the year. And you can do this with third graders. There is some adaptations that need to be involved in doing this, but it's definitely a great introduction, especially towards the end of the year as they're transitioning to 4th grade, about either persuasive writing or an opinion writing, or just using really good text evidence in support when you are doing your writing. So the purpose of the DBQ, or students are in the shoes of the historian, they're making decisions for themselves. And my favorite part about this is that they're using valid and vetted resources. So this is a ready-made, ready to go. You can open it up, you can start using it day one. I would encourage people to watch some of the videos if you can't actually go to the training. Joe was great. He brought us in, offered the training for DBQ. I have to say it's one of the best companies that I've ever interacted with. If I had questions, you can literally email the developer of it and they respond, and they're very gracious about sharing information. So it's super user-friendly on the teacher side. But then for students, they develop strong arguments for their thesis using direct evidence. Again, that's our struggle. That's what our main focus is, trying to get kids to develop those analytical thinking skills. I love this core beliefs, and this comes directly from the DBQ project. All students need to learn how to think. And I think that is part of what made me so passionate about using this in my instruction. The fact that they honor that learning requires practice, that for both teachers and students, right? This is new. The first time I navigated through this, I probably didn't even give it anywhere near the due justice that it deserved. And as I've used it more, it's become easier. I like that they recognize thinking is hard work. I think sometimes we marginalize that for kids, and we're like, oh, you know, everybody can think, and but it is hard work, and digesting and taking things in chunks. It's hard, it's messy, it's clunky, and I just appreciate the fact that they honor that. Thinking is clarified by writing. I think that speaks a lot to the why of writing. Sometimes that's a hard sell for kids, especially for kids that don't love writing. But to explain to them that this is just another form of communication, it helps clarify what you're thinking. Perhaps it will bring a little bit of a better sense of purpose to them for that writing process. And that thinking is for everyone. The DBQ project does an amazing job scaffolding and differentiating for all students so that this is accessible learning, no matter what level of learning your students are at. And so why teach with the DBQs? We're really talking about that evidence-based learning. Elementary school students are capable of writing a multi-paragraph essay. It goes back to that interdisciplinary piece. It gives them purpose for writing. They're vested in this topic because it's not just a one and done, like learn about it, write about it. It's learn about it, get messy with it, talk about it, have some engagement and conversation about it, really be able to support your thesis, and then you get to write your strong essay on it. It does connect the elementary instruction to the middle and high school instruction. So the AP history, I believe, I know in our district, they strictly use the DBQ format. I believe that's universal. I could be wrong. But it's a great introduction for how they're going to be asked to think and communicate their learning later on. And a well-designed DBQ has the potential to promote higher order thinking and enhance literacy combined with the rigor and interest for students. So as we move forward and I show you the examples, I think you'll be able to see that. So are DBQs just for social studies? Absolutely not. I use this for my persuasive writing unit. And we have boxes of Lucy Hawkins, and I won't get on my soapbox about Lucy, but we have them in our rooms. And we've really struggled as a fifth grade. I was the facilitator for our PLC, and that was one of our continual conversations, is like, it's just not as meaningful for the kids. And so using the DBQ, which is something our fifth grade did collectively this year. So we are 5 elementary schools that feed into 1 middle school in our district. And very rarely do we ever have that type of consistency in instruction and equity in instruction for our fifth grade students that are moving into the middle school. And this is something that we agreed that we would all do at least one, so that all fifth grade students moving into the middle school had this type of experience, because this is how our middle school social studies team has decided that they are presenting their social studies instruction. So it does have an equity piece to that as well. Can my special ed students serve with services use DBQs? Absolutely. I'm going to talk about and show you some of the supports for that. And is this something I can use for ELA instruction? 100%. I actually have thought about doing like the Lucy Hawkins rubric compared to the DBQ rubric, because it is so similar. I think you could almost just overlay them and you would be perfectly fine. Like we'll talk a little bit about a strategy they use. Lucy uses boxes and bullets. DBQ uses bucketing, and it's the same exact process. It's just a different name for it. So in the elementary schools, they have 2 binders that are specifically directed towards elementary school. I'll bring you to the site and you'll be able to see that there's tons of other resources. These are just written specifically for elementary school. So they are all interdisciplinary. On the teacher side, you can open the page and it will tell you lesson by lesson, like, this is a good opportunity to bring in some grammar skills, or this is a great opportunity to bring in science or math. So they've already done that work for you. It's just a matter of you either catching that and bringing that in intentionally, or using that in a way that fits your students' needs. So the Lexile levels for these DBQs fall between a 3rd and 6th grade level. Again, it's pretty adaptable. You can do this small groups. This is something you could easily hand off to a resource room teacher, and they could have a similar experience if they were being pulled during that social studies instruction time, which was one of our things that came up in our Yeah But meeting. They have some short skill builder exercises that are scattered throughout the units. And then there's task cards that go with each one of these units that allow for either center use. You can use it for differentiation. You can use it for classroom discussion. You can incorporate some technology, and like, you could post that question on a Jamboard and kids could go on and answer that. So there's a lot of resources that are available. So when I say it's $350, and sometimes that's a big gulp depending on what your financial resources that you have available to you are, you get a lot for your money. And this kind of feels like an infomercial. And just so you know, I don't get any kickbacks from the DBQ project. So every lesson always starts with a hook. It's very much a balanced instructional model. This is where students are talking. Sometimes it's a picture, sometimes it's a cartoon. It could be a chart or a graph. It could be an artifact of some sort. So it really gets students thinking. And just like Joe was saying in the Let's Act framework, this is where you're really like pulling out what students know. You're being able to identify any biases that they're bringing to this topic. One of my favorite that we do is, what does the Longhouse teach us about the Iroquois? And the hook exercise it's 2 photographs of very different types of houses. And the question asks students to be like, who lives there and what do they do? And the inferences that kids make, it's amazing. And so one kind of looks like maybe like a little shack on the water. And then the other one is a grass kind of hut, like it's built in, it's an earthen house. And some kids will be like, well, the people that live in the shack by the water, they're poor. And other kids say, no, they're not poor. Their house is like 2 stories. Like, what are you talking about? Do you see how big that is? Like, the people that live in this, earthen house, like they probably have dirt floors. Like, they're more poor, and it's really interesting to see what kids see. Some kids look super close and they'll make a comment, and then everybody grabs their papers back and they're looking at it and they're like, oh yeah, now I see that. And it's such an awesome experience to kickstart learning and interest. They really do a great job in the binders and online to really get kids engaged right from the start. So then they have a background essay that they go through. This is where, like, when we're talking about building that understanding and building the vocabulary, this is the place that we do that. We use close reading strategies with this, and my kids actually have like close reading kits that they have in their desk. They know, they pull those out. We read that background essay sometimes like up to 4 times. The first time we go through, we look at our headings, we go identify our essential vocabulary. Then we read for understanding, we annotate, we do little summaries next to each paragraph. So when you're talking about bringing in those ELA skills, the background essay is one of the places that you can really do that. And this is the first time that students are actually introduced to that thesis statement. And so this is kind of that overarching question that they're going to keep going back to. And so when you talk about giving purpose for reading, this is where they have it. Like, okay, this is the question that we're going to try to answer. So what does the Longhouse teach us about the Iroquois? And every time we read something, we're going to go back to that question. And that's what we're going to go back and say, okay, after I read this document, Now I think I know a little bit more about what the Longhouse teaches us. I think this article was telling me it teaches this. So it's really good for purposeful reading and getting kids engaged in that process. And it's amazing how much the reluctance to read something diminishes when they have the purpose for that. And they're really doing a lot of analysis. There's a summary exercise that comes with this. So this is again, another place to check for misunderstandings or any bias that they're bringing to that. And that could be interrupting their processing of the information that's being provided. There are some micro cues, and this is another way that the DBQ differentiates. They have sentence starters, and summaries that are created actually can become the introduction to their final essay. So not only are you scaffolding your learning, but it's also scaffolding the essay writing process as you go along. So if you have students that are reluctant writers, or if that's something that's organization is difficult for them, the DBQ does a great job scaffolding that so they can just literally take their introduction or their summary and transfer that into their essay as their introduction. So it really gives meaning to doing that work, because we say, okay, make this the best summary you can. We're going to go back and edit and revise it. But remember, you can take this and transfer that, and this is going to become your introduction. So they're building it out piece by piece. The pre-bucketing process is just like boxes and bullets. You'll have they use the bucket, and I like that visual better than a box and a bullet, because that's kind of, I don't know. I think that's more abstract. The bucket is really concrete for kids. Like you're putting your information into the bucket. So your bucket is labeled. It has like the topic of your first paragraph could go in there. And then all of the evidence that supports that goes into your bucket. And that's not just for the first document. It could be from document A, B, C, or sometimes D if there's 4 in your unit. So it really gets students into the analysis piece of this. Students are reading every document. It's a great opportunity for teachers to model through document A, how to do it. The EV and the micro Q, those are just differentiated versions of the same DBQ. So in the DBQ binder and your online version, you get 3 choices. You have an enhanced version that has a lot more scaffolded support for students and teachers. And then you have a clean version, and the clean version doesn't have the guided questions. It really is asking students to start generating those questions at the end. So I might start the year using like a couple enhanced versions, and by the end of the year, my goal is to be able to use a clean version where kids are able to just look at a document and generate the same types of questions that they were asked in the enhanced version. And then the micro Q is something that you may choose to use with your students that need a little extra support, or if you have just maybe some kids that are struggling readers, because that builds in the most amount of support, and it just takes out some of the more, just the deeper thing. I don't even want to say that. They don't really take it out. They just simplify it for people. So kids can go in there. It's not so overwhelming. Maybe instead of 5 questions that are analysis type questions, it may ask only 2, but it will pull out the 2 most important. So as they're analyzing, they're asking students to do all sorts of great analysis and writing strategies, like source the document, note the note. They're asking them to read closely, to make meaning. So there's all sorts of these ELA skills that are built into this just naturally. The thrash out is probably the most important part of the DBQ. This is actually where students are testing their supporting evidence to make sure that, number 1, it's accurate, and number 2, that it actually does support what their thesis is. And the kids love this, because a lot of times we just do this orally, and like we'll have, if you're on this side of this argument, go to this part of the room. And then we go back and forth and we say, okay, now you tell me your evidence. And then they get to yeah, but it. And it really just is fun. It's exciting. It gets them engaged. Sometimes you have kids change sides. Like they're like, okay, well, I thought this, but now I actually think this, and they'll actually physically move to another side of the room. So if this is something you choose to go with, I would strongly encourage you to look at their instructional videos that they have on their website, really give due justice to this thrash out piece, because outside of that first part of the engagement and then the last part, this is like the meat of the sandwich. And then the last part comes to writing the essay. So they go through a writer's workshop model process. They have access to all of their documents. So literally, like, kids will have their documents spread out on their table. They go back and they look at their highlighted sections and all of their annotations. So it makes all of the work that they've done initially so meaningful, because now they're pulling that all back together and really synthesizing that in that final essay. So some of the instructional strategies that they use consistently, the bucket is consistent. They use the chicken foot for the thesis and the supporting arguments. And then in their analysis sheet, they ask them to cite evidence, make inferences, provide an argument, and then use the supporting details from the bucket. So they also provide rubrics for every unit and a checklist for students that is so super kid friendly. My kids absolutely loved it. It really addresses that equity issue about kids being able to have clear understanding of what's expected of them. So quickly, I know we're probably a little bit short on time, but these are all of the identified like high yield learning strategies that DBQ uses, and these are all clickable. Again, this link will be in your resource, so you can go back and you can revisit that. And then this is the website for the DBQ project. So these are all of the DBQs that they offer. I'm so jealous that some of these states have their own. But so the mini Qs in elementary, there's a volume 1, and these are all of the titles that come with it. There's a volume 2, which one of my goals this year is for all of elementary schools in our district to get volume 2. I'm going to be putting that in as a budget request relatively soon, because budget season happens really quick. And then I want to show you what it looks like on the teacher end if you decided to go ahead and purchase the digital version. So this is actually exactly what it looks like in your binder as well. So this is the introduction, has an overview. It tells you the 3 documents that your students will be navigating through. On the teacher side, it tells you just a little bit more about those. And then, so this is that hook exercise. So you can see we have like this earth and home. And then, so this is where my kids were like, okay, they're like, well, no, the person that lives on the water, they're rich. Look at, they have like a 2-story house and it's huge. And so they asked them to answer these questions. I always ask my students to do some personal reflecting and have their own answers on this first. And then they go and we share out. On the teacher side, it gives you possible answers. So they do a great job helping support the teacher as you're going through this, especially if you're just picking this up and trying it on your own. And then it brings you into this background essay. So you can see it already has the bold-faced words. It's very much those nonfiction text features, the structure. It asks you to read everything, which I also love, like all the way down to the bottom, the fine print, the captions. And then on the teacher's side, it actually helps you walk through the 4-step reading strategy. And then you get into your background essay. Students will answer this for understanding. Now, the great part about this on the digital side, if you have it on the online version, they can actually take this information and it automatically transfers into their final essay. If you have the binder, you have to have them just keep that information in a folder. So then they go into the bucketing. So they have to make sure that they understand the question and they start their pre-bucketing. On the teacher side, it already shows you what those labels are. So maybe this is the first time you've ever used this strategy. You have the support to walk through that as well. And then they get into document A. So you can see they're short, they're visual. There's usually some visual that goes along with that. They answer the questions. This is document B. I love that they use a variety of documents. These are already vetted. You don't have to worry about accuracy, or they're all reliable sources that they've pulled from. Then they get into the final part where they do their final bucketing and their thesis writing. And then it actually has the essay broken out in just such a great kid-friendly, simplistic way of showing them exactly what needs to be where. And this can be a gradual release process as well, where students don't necessarily have to have this the whole way through. You may choose to do this, we work on trimesters, but first trimester, second trimester, by third trimester, I want them to be able to do most of this on their own. And so they can build out their student essay. On the teacher side, it gives you examples. And then if you have the online version, these are all annotative tools that you can use. So that's just a little bit about the DBQ. I will be sharing the DBQ project. So it's dbqproject.com if you're interested in learning more about that. But I honestly can say it's probably the best $350 that we've spent. If you break it up into grade levels 3 through 5, it ends up being some, depending on how big your grade levels are, but it could be as low as $25 per classroom to have access to such a great comprehensive resource. All right, Joe, back to you.
Thank you, Melissa. Full disclaimer, the Maine Department of Education does not endorse any curricular specific materials. As I noted in the chat, for anybody who might be watching this later on, there are free DBQs online. You heard Melissa talk about the processes and the training involved with the DBQ project. You can reach them again at the website that you've done. There are definitely benefits to the program like this, but again, just to make sure I'm protecting myself, Maine Department of Education does not endorse any specific curriculum or one or the other. If you have any additional questions about the DBQ project, Melissa can talk about her experiences with that. And then I'm also able to, having worked with Chip Brady, the founder of DBQ project, I am able to help connect you with that as well if you have questions beyond that. All right, so thank you, everybody. Stephanie, Melissa, and Stephanie. I don't even know the order of the Stephanies anymore. I just keep putting Melissa in the middle of it. Thank you, everybody, for continuing with us. We're going to pick up on our next little session here. We're going to give you a break in a little less than an hour before we go into our last session, but I do want to move us along. Social studies, the main learning results for social studies have 4 different strands based on 4 different content areas. And they are political science and government, civics and government, geography, history, and personal finance and economics. And so we're going to rotate around again. Stephanie Connors has been very nice, and she's going to actually do 2 of those 4 content areas. But we're going to hear from Stephanie, Melissa, and Stephanie. You're doing 3? Civics and government and history, right?
Yeah. Oh, I guess that is 2.
Civics and government, yeah. So
Yep.
what we're going to do is we're going to rotate around again. You're going to hear from Stephanie, Melissa. What is our order? Stephanie, Melissa, and Stephanie, and then Stephanie again. They're going to talk about those content areas and how they integrate them in their classrooms across not only social studies, but other content areas as well. So Stephanie Connors is going to start us off by talking about history in the elementary classroom.
Sorry, I forgot to unmute. Okay. So when I'm thinking of integration, I really think of reading and the ELA block and how much history, government, and civics lends itself to being a part of those subjects. And it's easier than you might think to integrate history, government, and civics in the classroom. So I'm going to start with history, and then Melissa's going to talk about geography, and we'll come back at the end to talk about government and civics. So history in an integrated classroom, unfortunately in my district, the only unit that we really have to talk about history in 4th grade for social studies is the American Revolution, which is fantastic anyway. And teaching history builds background knowledge and for students. And one of the things that I talked with them about this year for student engagement is this picture I have of Mary Ludwig Hayes or Molly Pitcher, which I spelled that wrong, my apologies. But the story of Molly Pitcher, when we start talking about it, was pretty amazing for them. And it really gets kids to think about asking questions and getting really involved in it. And this was a great picture because we started talking about this particular story and how women couldn't really technically officially be involved in the war, but they would often follow their husbands into battle, and that Mary Hayes would help by bringing water in the heat to soldiers, and she would help load the cannons. And there was one time where her husband had fallen when he was loading a cannon, and a cannonball from a British cannon shot right between her legs and pulled her skirt out and ripped her petticoat off, and she kept firing that cannon while her husband was down. And this was great because if you look at number 4, there was a primary source in one of the books we found for 4th grade that had a story of a man telling the story of being next to Mary Hayes, Molly Pitcher, as she was doing this. So there are some primary resources that you can get for younger kids. It's also important, if we go back up to the second one, is to balance what's important to teach and what's age appropriate. So if we're thinking about like Columbus Day and Indigenous Peoples Day, it's really important to talk about how there were Indigenous people here before Columbus, but maybe it's not so appropriate to talk to 2nd graders about how brutal Columbus might have been to them and how he treated them. And when you integrate history, you're also asking questions and encouraging students to ask questions. Like in the case of Molly Pitcher, kids couldn't believe it. They kept asking me, well, was she hurt? Like, how come she stayed there? Wasn't she afraid? And so they started thinking about putting themselves in that situation, which is empathy, which is what we want to develop in kids. And consider virtual field trips. There's some resources here at the end that talks about, that gives some ideas for virtual field trips. And history in an integrated classroom also shares multiple perspectives. Stephanie Nichols already talked about women's history. And so thinking about history from not just the perspective that we know, but like to think about, if you're thinking about Columbus Day, what was it like for the Native peoples that live there? And to include instruction in reading comprehension strategies. And I know one of the things that we talked about a lot this past year in our American Revolution was we were really just learning to take notes. We had practiced it in the winter, but they really realized that when they had to collect information to work on projects, they had to take notes. They couldn't just kind of wing it anymore. They had to back up and reread and look for information, and they had to ask questions. And I tie the history in with using my cafe board. So there are lots of comprehensions and accuracy strategies that students can use to help them understand what they're reading. So these are some, am I missing one? No. So these are some examples of things that you could use. And I kind of wanted to go through a little bit of them. And I'm not sure kind of where everybody is and what they're teaching, and different ages have different things that they're probably teaching. One thing I wanted to point out was this Maine State Museum teacher webinar series. So the Maine State Museum is still doing a lot of like virtual activities, even though they're closed for renovations. And I wanted to show this one because this is an online workshop series for diving into Maine history with primary resources. And I know in 4th grade, you learn about Maine history. So this is a webinar and it starts tomorrow. The first one is diving into Maine history, and it's tomorrow afternoon. So I wanted to make sure that folks were aware of it, that using Maine-based historical images, documents, and artifacts, and where to find those. Another one that I wanted to show too is Newsella. This is completely free. I'm seeing Stephanie Nichols nod her head. So these are really great for some older kids, but if you can, once you sign up, a lot of the articles have different, they have different reading levels. So you can pick lots of different things. So if there is a specific content that you're thinking about, you might be able to pull a project or some reading here and find it at a different reading level. So this is a free one. It's fantastic. And it's a lot of it is current events. And sometimes there might be historical things that are happening. Like I know there was just something a body was found that was buried many, many, many years ago. And Newsella wrote an article about it. So if you're trying to tie in past history, a lot of times there's articles there. Another one is Ducksters. I don't know how familiar people are with this. It's an oldie, but it's a really goodie. And we use this a lot to pull information. So there's information here about Native Americans and colonial America. I use this for the American Revolution quite a bit. So if you're looking for really, really short bits of information, this is a really good place to come to. So one of the things that I realized earlier, I forgot to show a slide that had some ideas about gamification, is you could do something like Ducksters where you turned it into a scavenger hunt. So if you had topics that you wanted kids to explore, you could have them go to Ducksters and you could have them look for specific things, and they'd have to read and take notes and answer questions in order to find things related to what you're trying to teach. This is Plymouth. So this is Plymouth and Patuxent museums. So these do have like virtual field trips too. It talks about the historic people here and the 17th century English village, the grist mill, the Mayflower too. So there's a lot of really good resources here that you can use if you're teaching about what life was like in the 1400s and 1500s. This one is Learning for Justice. This used to be called Teaching Tolerance. And so there's a lot of good resources here. If you don't quite know how to approach a subject thinking about injustice or equality, this has a lot of really good resources too. And so I put this in with history because sometimes it's really difficult to teach history without talking about identity and diversity and injustices. This one is Epic. I know Stephanie Nichols had mentioned this before, but this is a really, really great resource. It's completely free. It's great if kids have, it's great if kids have one-on-one devices because they can read books. You can create libraries for them. You can assign certain books. So you can look for, like Stephanie has said, audio books or read to me books. If you have kids that are at lower reading levels, this is a really great resource. I use this a lot for building background knowledge about different people. This one is one that we use quite a bit during our American Revolution unit. This is the American Revolution Museum. And so there are a lot of resources. It talks about the events and what's going on there too, but they also have, you can go to the virtual museum tour, and then they also have a lot of like books on tape. They have videos and things that you can watch. So if there's anything that you're learning, the kids are learning about people or events, this one's a really great one to go to. And I think that was probably it, I think. But when I think of teaching history, I think of it as being like, we do it all the time. So if I'm doing a read aloud, for instance, about one time I wanted to read about, for a biography unit, I wanted to read about Malala. And I had a really great book called Malala's Magic Pencil, but she couldn't, but I felt like students really wouldn't understand anything about Malala unless they understood her background. And so we looked at Google Earth and we looked at what Afghanistan was like, and we read some books about Afghanistan itself, and it talked about the history, what's happening currently and what's happened in the last 20 years, and what it's like for girls and women and just to be a child there, so that they really got a better sense of what it was like to be Malala. So a lot of teaching history is really building that background knowledge. And for teachers that don't have a lot of time in their day, there are things that you could do, like you could maybe create games with scavenger hunts. If you did like a bingo board, you could have students get information from an epic book and make a bingo board about it. You could do Quizlet. There's a lot of different things you could do to add these into your day. And I think that I'm going to stop there and turn it over to Melissa.
All right, thank you. So I have geography, and I wanted to share a couple of resources that I think are quick, easy go-tos that can help you get some information. But honestly, I think if you go and you look at those, the new updated standards on the Maine DOE site, it's always good to go back and get that refresher. And then honestly, I have to have a disclaimer. I was also part of the Moose module development, and there are some fantastic geography pieces in there that are Maine specific. I know in our last round, I just worked with a group that had students traveling to different state parks throughout the state. And there's a whole math piece that goes along with that, where they have to do some budgetary work. So there is a plethora of information in there and resources. And if you're looking for free, quick, easy, already developed resources, that's a great place to start. So one of the other resources that people may or may not be super familiar with is Google Earth. And so I'm going to screen share there, and I'm going to show you how to navigate into that to find the information. So when whether you're on an iPad or whether you're on a computer, Google Earth always kind of brings you to the same starting point, which is obviously Earth. But if you go to the Voyager button, it will take you into some of these subcategories that it has. So it has games, it also has layers, street view, culture, but then this tab of education brings you to all of these amazing, like cross-curricular integrated study type of pieces. So you have triangular structures. So when we were doing our geometry unit, we looked at triangular structures, we looked at the geometry of sustainable architecture, and then we looked at geometry of castles. And then I know this is a geography piece, not necessarily a math piece, but then we were able to look at maps of these places. We were able to even connect some history things into that. So Google Earth has tons of resources for kids. If you're wanting to bring in some science, the Exploring Earth's Keystone Species was a great one. We actually use that with our DBQ, should the wolf be protected. And so there's just so many different resources in Google Earth. If you haven't been there, I would strongly encourage you to do that. It even has one on ecosystems. If you're looking for some ELA, it has fairy tales and myths and legends from around the world. When you bring these up, they're all interactive, and it will actually bring them to the place. So you can see on the screen how it navigates them to the location. It brings them down to the street view. And it's like, you know, some of our kids are from these little, even though we're in Southern Maine, it's still rural. And a lot of them have, like, if they go to Portland, that's a big trip. Some have never even been to Boston. So to be able to take them to Zimbabwe and for them to see the structures that are there, it just literally opens up a whole new world of possibilities for them. And then they can go to they can navigate through this. If they go to the Learn More site, some of them have videos, and it will take them and they can actually see, it will do a math lesson piece with them on that. So it's super cool. The kids absolutely love it. They sometimes chose to do that for their free choice. If they had an option to be able to go on and do some approved app choice, a lot of times kids were going into Google Earth and finding these amazing places to go. Another resource that people may or may not be aware of is National Geographic has lots of great resources. So this is actually a crosswalk between Common Core and some of the National Geographic education resources that they have. You can download this, it's a whole PDF. They have it for all grade levels. If you go down to the bottom, it takes you to the different grade levels. So I believe it goes just to kindergarten. So if you're a pre-K, then it doesn't have resources for that, but you can download all of this. It's the crosswalk between the Common Core English Language Arts and Geography connections. So if, we talked about in our Yeah But session, if you were looking for a starting point, I would start with your Maine learning results. I would then look and see how those fit into the different pieces that they have here in the Nat Geo resources, but then you also have your ELA connections that are easily done for you, already brought in, already tagged and identified, which saves a lot of time if you're looking for that starting point. Another one was Map Skills, and this is another Nat Geo resource, but Map Skills for elementary school students. I really liked that it had a pre-K to 1 option, because I think sometimes, I know for myself, I have a hard time figuring out what that might look like. And so there was just some great ready-made resources for people to use. You can certainly do a lot of mapping activities with ELA, with math. There's one on here for coordinate grids. Even I know we've done some mystery science pieces that have students doing mapping type activities. So I really think geography is one of those ones that it seems like it sometimes is a little bit easier to bring in because there's a lot of different things that you can do with that. But those are just a few of the resources that I thought people might want to check out, and they're relatively easy and they're all free. So off to you, Steph.
All right, thank you. So I took the opportunity to look at how just a couple different ways that I incorporate personal finance into my classroom. And I'll just pop that up. Okay. So like I said, integrating personal finance in the elementary classroom. At first, I remember kind of seeing that and I was like, oh my gosh, personal finance, 2nd grade, oh my goodness. But there's actually a lot of really incredible opportunities for it. And I really like doing it in my classroom. So the first thing I did was kind of just pop in, what does the standard say? So like Joe said, there are those strands. This strand is personal finance and economics. We have the standard students draw from concepts and processes in personal finance to understand issues of money management, saving, investing, credit, and debt. Students draw from concepts and processes in economics to understand issues of production, distribution, consumption in the community, Maine, the United States, and the world. So after we have the standard, then we have a couple performance expectations. I pulled the personal finance and the economics one just because that's what I was talking about today. Basically, in a nutshell, with personal finance, students are going to understand the nature of personal finance, as well as key foundational ideas by describing how planning for the future is important to managing money. And then economics, students understand the nature of economics as well as key foundational ideas by explaining how people make choices to use scarce resources and make individual and collaborative plans to meet their own needs and wants. So in 2nd grade, we do a lot of focus on wants and needs. One of the things I did include, because when I pulled this standard, this is a specific 2nd grade standard that I pulled. So I included a link just here, but basically if you haven't used this before, a quick way to find what the standard says for your grade level is on the Maine.gov. When you go to the social studies standards, if you scroll down, you'll be able to find that you can access standards broken out by grade level. So what I did was I went to grade 2, and I scrolled through and looked for what it was I was looking for. So we've got civics and government, it says up here, and we go down right here, personal finance. So that's a tool that I use a lot just because I don't know the standards by heart. And so it's a really great way to go back and just kind of double check what it is it's actually saying. So some examples of integrating personal finance in my classroom. To start out with, I kind of lay a groundwork down about money. Second grade, we in the past in my district have used everyday math. This year we do have a new math curriculum, so I'm interested to see kind of how our money unit fits in with that. But basically in my grade level in second grade, there is an everyday math unit on coins, on money. And so I look to my curriculum to sort of get that ground knowledge first. You know, I feel like kids aren't going to be able to learn about managing their money if they don't know what we use for money. So we do a lot of work with coins, with dollars, and then working on adding money first, being able to add and subtract money. Going from there, I use a classroom economy in my room. I use Class Dojo as, in the past, I've used it as a management tool. In the past year or so with the pandemic, we've used a lot of Seesaw. So I haven't used Class Dojo the same way that I used to, but I do still use it for our class store. So students have an opportunity through the week to earn money to use in our class store. Whenever they earn a dojo point, each point is worth 1 cent. So what I like about Class Dojo is that you can, it's these cute little like monsters, and they have a lot of programs, like they have a lot of social emotional learning that you can access to go with that. They have a lot of stuff that I enjoy, but for using it as a classroom economy, it keeps track of kids' points throughout the week. So teachers can customize what kids earn points for. I typically try to align them with our code of conduct, but you know, kids, for some examples, you know, I will assign, oops, and I spelled assignment wrong. Students might get a point each time they turn in an assignment. Anytime I catch them sort of showing responsibility. Each student has their own bank, and I did take a picture of it, so that's on the slideshow, but I use plastic snack containers that I found at the Dollar Tree, or soap containers like that you would take to travel with, a bar of soap. Make really great student banks. They're also really affordable. The ones that I use came in packs of 2, so it cost me like less than $10 to get enough for my class, and I just keep reusing them. Students have their own bank. So on Fridays, what they do is students come to my back table, my teacher table, and we cash out. So we go over their points for the week, how they did this week, you know, things that they did really well this week that I was really impressed by, really proud of them for, remind them to give themselves a pat on the back. And then what I do is I have a little mini tub of coins, like everyday math manipulative coins, and I have them pull out their own money. So this gives them that opportunity where they're having to make the coin combinations of what they've earned through the week. And then I've also had kids make change when they've been saving any money. They might trade it in for a dollar bill. So they take their money out, they put it in their bank. Then they can decide, we have this talk at the beginning of the year, but they can decide, do you want to spend it this week in the store on something? Or would you like to save your money and put it towards something, maybe a bigger item in the store that you could get later? I have a lot of kids, depending on I have little things of Play-Doh that are like $1. I've had kids save for a while to get a Play-Doh. And so they kind of learn about saving money versus you know, do I want to just spend it now? A lot of times with wants and needs, if kids have broken their pencil throughout the week, or they see I have some fun pencils, they might say, well, I broke my pencil. I don't have, you know, I just have a boring one. I'd like to buy another fun one. So they look at their wants and needs. I have erasers, things like that. Obviously, if a student ever needed something, I would never tell them in second grade, oh, you have to wait till the end of the week. But they use it just to kind of get a cooler version maybe of what they need or want. This is an example, just a picture of I have a dojo, like a price list for my class store. So these are just some examples of things I have, and I do put it in a plastic sheet and I let kids look at it. That way they can keep track of what's in the store without having to pull out my whole bin. And they can ask questions or look and see, how much do I need to save if I want that item, or how much can I spend, you know, if I want to get that this week. This is an example of one of my banks. This is just a student from a few years ago. But basically I put a little bit of tape on the top, and I change it up every year. But I do wash and save my banks, and I reuse them. And so that's an example. He still had some coins in there from when we left in March of 2020. But these are really affordable, really easy, really storable as well. So they're easy to store in my classroom. Let's see. Oh, and that's it. But I was thinking kind of talking about some resources, some other ways I incorporate into other subjects. I do sometimes look, oh, no, it did work. I also utilize, in our district, we utilize junior achievement. This is a really awesome program if that's something that, you know, I know in the past we've done it or had been set up through our assistant principal. But if there's any way to find a way to connect with junior achievement, it's been really great. This program brings trained volunteers from the communities to our classrooms. And in the past, our students have learned about what it takes to start a business. They started a donut company. The kids loved it. But they learn about things like production costs, wants and needs in business, our community economy. Kind of like going back to what I had said earlier, you know, if you save your money and you buy something at the store, where that money goes into your community. Well, what happens after you pay it to the store? What does the store use the money on? And how does it keep going through our community? It's really fun. They learn about personal finance through a hands-on project-based learning approach. They come in, typically it's like once a week for a certain amount of weeks, and they almost build and work on this project through the whole time. And kids have a really great time with it. My class has loved it in the past. So that's something that hopefully we'll get to utilize again this year. In terms of literature, you know, I think about books like The Lemonade War. I've used that in the past with students where we learned, you know, it's two siblings that both start competing lemonade stands, and the fighting gets a little dirty between these two siblings. It's a brother and a sister. But we talk a little bit about that, about starting a business. And, you know, in the past, in other districts and grade levels I've worked in, we've done a project kind of like a lemonade stand within the school. But again, that was through a different district than where I work now. And I did definitely reach out for permission to do that, because when you're working with actual money or with something like that, you do need to make sure that it's approved or that it's something you're able to do. So yeah, those are just some ways that I try to incorporate personal finance into my classroom. And then I think, Stephanie, it's back to you again for government. And
It is back to me. Thank you, Stephanie Nichols. That was great. I wanted to talk now about civics and government in an integrated classroom, because actually we do this all the time. We already incorporate civics and government, and maybe we just don't even realize it. And I took this picture of a class constitution that I just did a quick Google search, and this is what I found. Because at the beginning of the year, we're thinking about building our classroom community, which is really what the Constitution was based on. It was how to bring 13 colonies that are very different together to work for a common good when there was no central government. So that's how we start the year thinking about our class constitution. And I didn't take a picture of the last one that we had to use for this because I didn't know, it's not there anymore. And when you start with a class constitution, you're thinking about what are your class values? What does your class want the room to be like? What does everyone need to do so that learning can happen in this environment? So everybody has a sense of responsibility. And I'm so glad that Stephanie Nichols showed the personal finance, how to access those standards on the Department of Education website, because I was going to show those too. Because when you look at the learning standards, even for kindergarten, it starts where kids have to start thinking about what are the rights and responsibilities of people in a government and in a community. And it starts where they are every day. And so I also ask my students too, is why do we have rules in the first place? Because they maybe aren't happy with the rules. They don't want to follow the rules. They feel like the rules don't apply to them, or they are, my favorite is they're always trying to have an angle, like they're trying to do a workaround. Like, how can we get around this rule? Well, let's first talk about why do we have rules? Like we talk about, well, don't run with a lollipop in your mouth because you could get hurt. So what are the rules that we need to create so that we can not be hurt? Or what are the rules that create an environment that's quiet enough that kids can focus? So some of the books that I've used in the past that are fantastic is this book, What Is? And this goes along with the Who Was series of books. This is a chapter book, maybe for older grades, but it talks about the Constitution. And it's a really great, if you want to introduce that idea and just kind of stick those vegetables and disguise them in the soup somehow, this is a really great way to do it as a read aloud, where it talks about the what happened at the end of the American Revolution and how the country was coming together and how different voices and different people came together to create this Constitution when there was a lot of conflict. And this is a really great one too for lower grades, is We the Kids by David Catrow. And that's a picture book about the preamble. And so if you needed to add some picture books, those are some great ones to start. And again, it's all about the standards. So going to the Department of Education website, and this was taken from the Department of Education website, where you can click on in a different place to find the standards. Always think, how might I fit these into my classroom instruction or daily routine? So if you're thinking about, one of the standards talks about, even in kindergarten, that kids are learning about the symbols and the celebrations of our country. What do they mean? Like when you were even talking about Independence Day, why do we celebrate the 4th of July? It can be very simple and it can be very quick. What resources, books, games, or videos can I use to support my students? And I have some games. We talked about Ben's Guide to the Government. And I have some other ones that I'm going to show a little bit later that could be used if kids are earning free time, if you wanted to have them read some books or watch a video and then think about a question that they have to respond to, so they could do a writing assignment during your lit block. You could do that too. Again, I always think about reading comprehension strategies and how you could fit any of these things into getting kids to think about how they have to comprehend information, and just trying gamification. How can you make this fun and engaging for kids? You can use them too for early finishers. I had some kiddos that kind of went pretty quickly through all their work, so they were able to have their thinking stretched with some other resources that they really, really liked. Consider how you might use project-based learning with some of these standards, and also Friday fun. I know that on Fridays in my district, we do Lucy Calkins too. So it's 4 days a week of writing instruction, but then that fifth Friday, or the fifth day, the Friday, could always be, how can we do some writing that's a little bit fun, that's a little bit more free. So I wanted to show the standards for civics and government. And this one is for kindergarten through 6th grade. So they start thinking about concepts of civics and government to understand political systems, power, authority, governance, civic ideals and practices and roles of citizens in the community, Maine, the United States, and the world. And you can see that it's pretty simple even in kindergarten. So kids are really starting to understand the processes that characterize democratic government. So talking about, why do we have a teacher in charge? Why do we have a principal in charge? Why do we have, classroom helpers even in our classroom? Why do we have somebody that helps to make sure that all the trash is picked up off the floor, that sharpens the pencils at the end of the day, and taking that outside to our community? Why do we have people that clean the snow off the roads? Why do we have people that deliver the mail to us? Why do we have people that come pick up our trash? And what about nurses and doctors and people that drive ambulances? So, I mean, even like we just don't even think, I know that in kindergarten, I've seen this happen, and I don't even think the kindergarten teachers realize that they're teaching these standards, but they're so simple. And when you think about how basic these are, we're actually doing these more than we think. And that if we're actually using the word social studies and getting kids to think critically about these, instead of just assuming that, hey, this is just what we do, but thinking deliberately and intentionally, why do we do these things? I think that it helps kids as we set them up for social studies in older grades too. By second grade, they're studying Native Americans, traditions and customs. And then they're still thinking about that in third and fourth grade, the democratic processes. And then in 6th to 8th grade. So I'm going to go back to the slideshow now, because I had something else that I wanted to, oops. So these are some other really good resources. And if you check these out, these are actually, sorry about that. These are actually links. So when you have access to the slideshow, you can click on these. So this one is iCivics, and this one is a great website because it has lots of games, and it also has some primary resources and ideas for teaching and remote learning. So, and remote learning, I don't know what's happening with a lot of school districts across the state of Maine, but I know in my school district that they're thinking that their snow days are a thing of the past. So it may be that if you're doing remote learning and kids have devices and they have internet connectivity, that this may be something that you want to do just to help add a little bit more of civics and government. You could also do it, again, you can flip your instructions. So if you have a Friday fun day, or if you have early finishers, or you have kids that just want to stretch themselves, or you want to assign maybe homework that they could work on and then come back to class and do, that's a good idea too. Sorry, I just have to go back. I can't get my picture bar to go away for a minute. The next one we have is Ben's Guide, which we talked about before, but last summer when my partner and I were writing our Moose module, we kept playing Ben's Guide, and we had so much fun doing it. We just couldn't stop. So there are different levels based on ages too. So ages 4 to 8, ages 9 to 13. So if you click on these, because this would be for like older upper elementary and for middle schoolers. So we can try this one first. But there's lots of information here about the branches of government, laws, the election process, tribes. This is a good one, songs, symbols and structures of the US government, especially if we're thinking about those like kindergarten and first grade, and some historical documents here, which are always great to show kids when they want to understand why their handwriting should be readable. Well, this is why. If we go back, there's some for the apprentice, the games. These are some learning adventures, how laws are made. So these are just really, really, really short explanations. What is a law? Who makes the laws? And how laws are made. So these are really great resources too. Here are some games. If you click on these at the top, there's some games. This one's geography. Here's some quizzes, crosswords, and word searches, which I think could be stretched to fit in the ELA block if you wanted to, especially in terms of learning new vocabulary. And this is learning about the 3 branches of government. So there's a lot of really, really fun stuff that's very appealing to young learners. And I mean, you can differentiate. So if you've got kids that are, their skills aren't quite as high as they need to be for 3rd or 4th grade, you can always differentiate different levels of games. And I think that could be good too. If you do something like Google Classroom, you can make assignments for kiddos in that. This one's a really great one. I found this on our elementary resources too. This is Kid Citizen. So this has a lot of great resources about kids engaging in the process of government. And it talks too about, it also has like really great resources for parents and for teachers. This looks a lot like, was this something that Stephanie showed earlier that had, I can't remember, but it has really great pictures of famous people, Rosa Parks, and even maps. This one's a really great one, the Secretary of State kids page. I don't know how many of you guys know about this one, but this is fantastic. It's very age appropriate. It's very developmentally friendly. This is our Maine Secretary of State kids page. And so this talks about like what happens in our state government. It has counties. So there's different, teaches you with songs to memorize. It has a map of the counties. So if you need any of that, there are some games, main symbols and fun facts. So these are really great. These might be good too for early finishers if you want kids to learn more about Maine. This one is Liberty's Kids. I had my students watch a lot of these episodes to help reinforce some concepts if I had gaps and I didn't have books. This is a series that used to be on PBS when my daughter was young. It was just coming out and she's 24, but it's a YouTube, it's on YouTube now. And it's all about these 2 kids who are from different perspectives. One is a reporter for Ben Franklin, and the other is Sarah, and she comes to America from England. And it talks about the Revolutionary War, and it provides some biographical information. There is one about Deborah Sampson, so we watched that as a class. It talked about Nathaniel Hale. It talked about the Boston Massacre, Paul Revere's Midnight Ride. It also talked about how the war ended and the Constitutional Convention. So these are about a half an hour, and they are really appealing to kids even 20 years later. And this one is my Maple story for the Moose platform, where it talks about civics. And this was the first chapter that we did that talked about civics and government. So there are some really great resources there if you're thinking about what you might want to do. And then I had just this kind of just be thinking about how might you incorporate more history, civics, and government into your classroom. So just kind of be thinking about maybe what kinds of questions you might have for one of us as we move into the last part of our closing thoughts and planning and development part of the morning, and thinking about how can we help you think of ideas that you could take baby steps even. I feel like we've presented you with so much information that it may be completely overwhelming to you to try to think about how to get it started. But maybe you could pick one thing and one topic, one area that you want to work on, and maybe think about inquiry, or how could you create a DBQ if that's where you wanted to go, or what about like project-based learning or gamification? What's one thing that you might want to pick and work on this afternoon, or what resources might you want to explore? And I think I am ready to be done there. So I will turn it back over to Joe.
And of course, as I was trying to come in, I hit the wrong button trying to join back in. So as I was dropping things in the chat. So thank you again to Stephanie, Melissa, and Stephanie, whichever order you want to put the Stephanies. Stephanie Connors at the end gave you that little bit of the prompt to think about coming like with next steps. So we are going to give you a short break. And we want you to come back. We're going to send you back out into those Java-like groups, Melissa and Stephanie. If you want to take a peek at who we still have, I don't know if we've lost anybody. I think our numbers are still there. And then who you had in those first groups, if you want to split them up or still have them the same, Stephanie Connors and Melissa. But we will take a short break. And then again, you will come back just like Stephanie had said, and we will put you in those groups to think about talking about resources, talking to our presenters about asking them questions, the Let's Act framework, developing some sort of curricular start, whatever you would like to make of that time. So again, we'll take about a 5-minute break to go do whatever you need to do at this time. We'll come back, we'll push in those small groups to begin working. All right, and welcome back, everybody. We've just spent about an hour in small groups chatting. And before we end our session for today, I've invited any of our participants to share thoughts about their big takeaways of informational resources or application pieces that they think they're going to be trying kind of moving back into the school year. So any of our participants, what would you like to share with others who might be listening who are not in the breakout rooms with you? I see Monica has her hand up. Susie, you were unmuted. Okay, so Susie's already unmuted. We'll go Susie, then Monica. And if anybody else would like to join in after, just let me know.
First of all, I want to thank you all for putting together such an awesome 4 hours, because this was a lot of work, a lot of information, and yeah, my mind is blown. And my go forward is to check out all these interesting websites and places so I can start plugging in some of the things that I can use as a social studies teacher moving forward today. And I also want to thank you, Joe, for the listserv, because I have absolutely used it. I've gone to Mount Vernon, gone to the American Indian Institute because of you opening those doors. So thank you for keeping this open for us, because anytime anybody says there aren't any resources out there, I can truly say, yes, there are. So thanks.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to go ahead. I just wanted to actually say that too. I appreciate all the information. One of the things that I was hoping for was to get some good resources. I particularly like the Let's Act. I like how that was spelled out, and I really want to work on really listening to my students and teaching them how to not just listen, but a lot of times students are thinking about what they want to say and they're not listening to the person that's speaking. And I often say that to my students, put your hands down and be listening to the speaker. And so I want to make sure that I use that thing of saying, well, kind of summarize or tell me what the person just ahead of you said. Loved that. That is definitely something I'm going to use. And the other one was during the D and Q. And I think I might put a sign up like this too in my classroom about how all students need to learn how to think. Learning requires practice and thinking is hard work. We don't really think of that. You know, so often I'll give my kids a topic and I'll say, okay, now let's write. And we don't give time to kids to really think about what it is that they want to say. They have to think about it first. And so I might put a little poster or a saying up in my classroom to remind me to give them that time and for them to realize that I do value how hard thinking and writing can really be. So that's what I'm taking away, plus other things.
Thank you, Susie, and thank you, Monica. Would anybody else like to chime in and share their thoughts? I will then turn it over to my presenters in any order that they see fit. Whoever would like to jump in first, please do so.
I can go first. I think just big takeaways for me, I just appreciated having this time with other elementary educators. It's nice to share resources. And, one of the things I loved about having the small groups with you guys and, having done this work with Melissa and Stephanie, I've loved just seeing and hearing what other elementary teachers are using for resources or practices. And I know for me, sometimes I struggle with hearing a lot of information, but not necessarily knowing how to apply that into my classroom. And so that's one of the things I really loved about chatting with the small group earlier for the yeah buts and, seeing Melissa and Stephanie's presentations. I really felt like I was able to wrap kind of my head around how I could use some of these resources in my classroom. So thank you guys so much.
I'll go next. Just keeping our, Stephanie, Melissa, Stephanie order. Thank you for joining us today. I know it's sunny where you are, it's sunny where I am. And sometimes it's hard to get back into that mindset of school when you're still clutching those last few days of summer. But I guess I would just leave you with some words of encouragement, is to keep the good fight and just keep working to integrate social studies in any way, shape, or form that you can into your classroom, and encouraging the people that work next to you and across the hall from you to do the same, because the relevance of this is significant and it's necessary. I think we're living in times where if we are not tackling this topic of social studies as a whole, then we are doing our kids a big disservice. And we have an opportunity to help truly form the future of this nation and this world. And I think it starts in our pre-K, K 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 classrooms. So don't ever let that feel like it's not an important ask of us in elementary school, because it is. It's necessary to have that before they hit middle school, before they hit high school, before they hit that big confusing world that's waiting for them out there. So just keep up the good fight. And if your administrators give you pushback, send them to Joe.
Okay, now I know what it's like to go at the end when everybody said all the big thoughts and things that you were going to say too. So thanks to everybody that was here. And I loved working with Joe and Stephanie and Melissa. It was really great. And if I could say anything, it would just be that just take baby steps. You just hear across the board, and I know my own kids' experience is that social studies and science were kind of some of the last things to be taught in some places. And so just take baby steps to incorporate what you can, how you can, and just remember that you're actually doing more than you think you are. And you have so many resources now. That was, I think, one of the things that the three of us wanted to really share with everybody, is that there are resources available for you if you get stuck or you need help. There's so much out there, just like Susie said, and to keep pushing for this. And like Melissa just said, it's more important now than ever to be teaching the history and to be teaching about collaboration and thinking critically, but also like it can be done. And I always think of just being a reader myself and a love of history, that this can be done in a reading with thinking about the ELA block and the time that you spend with all of the reading comprehension that you do, the work you do around teaching kids how to read, to learn. This is it. This is why we do it. So just take baby steps and try to incorporate anything you can, anything you might find. Keep pushing, keep letting your administration know, work with those lit specialists, work with your curriculum coordinators, let your administrators know that you need time or help, or you want to grow your own classroom library, I'm so glad that so many people came today. So thank you for your participation and letting us know where you are and what you need and letting us be a part of your day. And I'm going to turn it back over to Joe.
And that is why I invite rock stars like Stephanie, Melissa, and Stephanie, because they leave me with nothing to say. So thank you to Stephanie, Melissa, and Stephanie for all you've done, for all you continue to do. Thank you to everybody for being here today. I'm going to end the recording here in just a second, but I will stick around to answer any questions that anybody might have. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy the rest of your day and whatever days left you have before you start into what's going to be the best school year ever, because social studies rocks.